Hello, welcome to this video lesson designed to help you understand the poem Checking Out My History by John Agard. We're going to work through the basic background of the poem, then the reading, and then finally we're going to move on to the analysis of themes that Agard created. Please make sure you've got your anthology with you so you can add notes, but be sure to leave space because you might need it at a later date. So, the basic background of this poem. John Agard, the writer of the poem, was born in Guyana, 1949. And Guyana is a former British colony. If you didn't know what that means, it basically means that it used to be under the control of the British Empire. So Agard moved to Britain in 1977 and sees our culture as both an insider and an outsider. If you didn't know where Guyana was, it's at the top of South America, and that's not far from the Caribbean. There's a lot of Caribbean influences in this poem, so that should help on your understanding later on. So in the poem, he expresses his ideas about education, history, and the idea that he has grown up with a Eurocentric view of the world. This means that it is dominated by European ideas, history, and achievements and things like that. So I've got some quotes that he said about the creation of this poem. He said, "The first line in our history book I seem to remember was West Indian history begins in 1492 with the arrival of Columbus. It's that very Eurocentric view. Nothing exists until the European has entered the arena. The telling of history depends on whom is telling the story." I think that really captures what this poem's about. He's saying that to the world, because of the people who wrote this history book, to the world, nothing existed in the West Indies, in the Caribbean, until the Europeans arrived. Nothing happened. And so he's saying that because Europeans have written the history books, everything is from a European point of view. I like to think that the poem has a very celebratory side. It's celebrating characters such as Toussaint Louverture and Mary Seacole. You'll learn more about those later. But in a poem, you aren't writing a history book. You aren't writing a piece of journalism. So it came out in two voices. One voice is the nursery rhymes, counterpointed by a celebration of historical characters. So what we learn from that then is that this poem, yes, it is a criticism. Yes, it does say how powerless he's felt throughout his life, but it does also celebrate the people who deserve to be celebrated. Finally, he said, using all of your linguistic heritage, which means background, gives a pride simultaneously in language but also in history. If we decode that, what he's saying is the freedom that he had when he was making this poem, it comes across in his language, but it also comes across in the historical references that he made. So his background, the knowledge of the background that he's gained, it comes across in the poem. Definitely through his language, definitely through his references. That will make more sense in a second. So we'll move on to the reading of the poem. I'm not actually going to read it out because it's supposed to be read in a very specific way. So I'll play a video of it and then we'll recap everything and go through the actual meanings after.
Checking out me history. Them tell me what them want to tell me. Man, they drop me eye with me own history, blind me to me own identity. Them tell me about 1066 and all that. Them tell me about Dick Whittington and E. Cat, but Toussaint Louverture, no, them never tell me about that. Toussaint, a slave with vision, lick back Napoleon, battalion, and first Black Republic born. Toussaint, the thorn to the French. Toussaint, the beacon of the Haitian Revolution. Them tell me about the man who discovered the balloon and the cow jump over the moon. Them tell me about the dish, run away with the spoon, but them never tell me about Nanny the maroon. Nanny, seafar, woman of mountain, dream, fire woman, struggle, hopeful, stream to freedom, river. Them tell me about Lord Nelson and Waterloo, but them never tell me about Shagga the Great Zulu. Them tell me about Columbus and 1492, but what happened to the Carib and the Arawak too? Them tell me about Florence Nightingale and Sheila, and how Robin Hood used to camp. Them tell me old King Cole was a merry old soul, but them never tell me about Mary C. Cole. From Jamaica, she traveled far to the Crimean War. She volunteered to go even when the British said no. She braved the Russian snow, a healing star among the wounded, a yellow sunrise among the dying. Them tell me what them want for tell me. But now I checking out me history. I carving out me identity.
So as you can tell from that, there's a very specific way that Agard wanted it to be read, much like a song, and there are lots of Caribbean traditions at play there, but we'll go into that a bit later. So making sure that we understand the poem then, there are lots of little steps that we have to take in order to make sure we fully understand it. That's basically making sure we understand its context, so who, what, where, when, why, and how. We're going to start with who. This is a little bit complex in this poem because there are lots of people mentioned, but we'll start off with the most simple ones. We've got me. He's talking in first person then, so he's the speaker of the poem is himself, Agard. It's deeply personal to him. But we've also got lots of references to them. If we translate what he means by that, he's saying them means them, which he actually in standard English would be saying them, that they. So the constant references to them and they could refer to teachers of his past, but perhaps also the education system itself. Saying me and them so much creates an us versus them mentality in the poem. It highlights how victimized he feels about the lack of access he's had to his own background, his own heritage. But we've also got a lot of references to these people. I've put them into categories. So he has lots of references to important figures from his own heritage, Toussaint Louverture, Nanny de Maroon. And if you didn't know who they were, they are listed here to the right. And then there are Eurocentric achievements and facts like 1066, Lord Nelson, Columbus, Florence Nightingale. But there are also Eurocentric legends or fairy tales, things that aren't true. Dick Whittington, the cow who jumped over the moon, Robin Hood, or King Cole. And the way that he balances these three categories of people or achievements or facts is very interesting. It actually looks like this when you look at the poem. So everything in blue, that's a Eurocentric fact. So 1066, Lord Nelson, Columbus, Florence Nightingale. And what tends to happen in the poem is that these get to be very often paired up with a Eurocentric legend, something that isn't true, fairy tale. Dick Whittington is next to 1066. Robin Hood is next to Florence Nightingale. But he always ends these with a black historical figure, someone from his heritage who he's proud of. So if we look at this example from the first stanza, 1066 and all that, that's what he's been taught. But also Dick Whittington and his cat. But Toussaint Louverture, no, them never tell me about that. So what he's saying is that I've learned about Eurocentric facts. I've even learned about Eurocentric stories that aren't even true, but I haven't learned about anyone from my own heritage who's actually important, who have actually done incredible things. And so I suppose his big problem in this poem is how he feels. He feels denied access to these incredible people. And so what he does is, and if you look at the green bits, he tells their stories, he celebrates their stories. The when and the where. So he starts off by repeating the line, "Dem tell me," and that tells us that he must be talking about his past. All the way through his life, he's been told this, he's been told that. And then the last two lines, he says, "But now," and that means it's his present. He's in the process of learning more about his history. And he ends the poem with, "I carving out my identity," and that implies that he's going to carry on into the future. He does also reference things from history as well, especially his own heritage. The where in this poem isn't quite as important as in others. He does describe places from history, but it's never really specifically linked to one place. I suppose if you wanted to talk about Agard himself, he'd be talking about Britain and Guyana, but I think he would want this poem to relate to other people as well. So you could say it relates to all the people who feel like a minority and feel like they are denied access to their heritage. If it's still not clear what the poem's about, this should hopefully help. So he begins by explaining that he has always been told a very narrow view of history. He's told what people say he should be told. He feels like he has been denied access to his heritage, his background, and begins comparing all the useless knowledge he has gained to the knowledge that he should have had, the knowledge that he has been blocked from, like Toussaint. He sings in celebration of what he has learnt about these black figures from history. Later in the poem, he continues to celebrate the other idols from his heritage while comparing them to Eurocentric facts and figures, as well as fairy tales, which seem more important than black history. And then he ends the poem defiant, strong, resilient. Now he is an adult, and now he feels empowered. He's learning about black history himself. And that's basically what the poem's about. So the how has it been put together? You may remember from other poems that a lot of the time when poets are creating their poem, they will create it in a way where the structure of it, the form of it, can in some way represent the meaning as well. So you'll notice that the way that this poem looks, it doesn't really seem to stick to any sort of a structure. The stanzas are all a little bit different. There are a couple that are 4 lines, but they never really stick to any sort of rhyme scheme or anything like that. So, is this because he is breaking the rules of what he has been taught? So the inconsistencies in this poem, is that because he is breaking those rules down from other poems? Is he breaking the rules down? These stanzas, the ones in italics, they're about the black figures from history who are really important to him, but they're also very different to the other stanzas. They're faster, shorter for each line. They're almost like songs. These reflect traditional Caribbean poetry, which was supposed to be told aloud. And that also explains the way that the spelling and the grammar of the poem works. So, dem, tell me. So it's all very traditionally written, which I suppose relates to the fact that he is crafting and carving out this new identity for himself, where he's learning about his heritage. The rhymes in the stanzas about Eurocentric figures, like Florence Nightingale, for example, if we just look at this, they are AABB, which you would call rhyming couplets. So lamp, camp, soul, sea coal. So AABB. These rhyming couplets are quite basic. It makes them sound quite simple. Is that a criticism then of the education system? Is that a criticism of the simple, narrow-minded view of history that education has had? But the rhymes, if you look at these stanzas about black historical figures, they're more adventurous, they're more creative, they're more exciting, they're more complementary. Right, moving on to the why then, the human condition, what we're learning, what it's saying about human nature, what it's saying about society and life and things like that. Well, it's a criticism of the education system, definitely, and definitely Eurocentrism. It explores how it feels to be a minority in the system. It explores how it feels to have access to your true identity denied. It's a celebration of important historical figures. It's a celebration of how a person can find and craft their own identities. Right, now that we've dealt with the who, what, where, when, and why, and how it was all put together and what the poem's actually about, we'll have a look at things a little bit more deeper now. So we'll have a look at how the themes have been created by Agard. So identity is definitely a theme in this text. It's definitely something that recurs all the way throughout. It's definitely helping Agard convey his key message. So is history, and so is celebration and respect. All 3 of these themes help Agard convey his messages, his ideas. Now, earlier in the video, we did actually cover history quite a lot when we were comparing Eurocentric historical facts and figures to fairy tales, and how even made-up stories seem to take priority over Black history. So we're not going to cover that too much. We will instead look at identity and celebration and respect in a bit more detail. So, starting with identity. I'm going to pick out quotes, starting with this one, and then I'm going to talk about how I think that they relate to the idea of identity, what they're saying about identity. So the beginning of the poem is this: 2 repeated lines of "dem tell me," and then "what dem want to tell me." So basically he's saying they are telling us what they want to tell us. Now, the first lines imply a barrier between the speaker and the people he was educated by. Dem sounds almost like they're an enemy, and the fact that it's repeated all the way through the poem definitely reinforces that. The repetition of the line reflects how much he was taught. He constantly was told these things that didn't really seem to relate to his heritage. He's told and told and told these things. Finally, the verb want reflects the power of Eurocentrism. They choose, they pick and choose what to teach, and none of it has helped him to build his true identity. And that's the power that they have, the fact that they could just choose what history was. Next, bandage up me eye with my own history, blind me to my own identity. Now, bandage and blind me are very important phrases here. He's not talking literally, so we know that they're metaphors. And these metaphors are about Agard not being able to see. So blind me. He can't see what he's supposed to see. He can't feel or learn what he's supposed to feel or learn. The important Black figures of his heritage were blocked from his view. So that's what those words mean in this metaphor. Both of these words make him sound physically wounded as well, as bandages are used to respond to injury. This reflects the pain that he feels at being denied access to his true education. Now, Agard has a very strong and proud perspective of what his identity should be, and that's reflected in the way that he says, "me own history," and he says that later on in the poem as well. So he has a very strong opinion of how history can be a matter of perspective, and what it is to him is something that he has always been denied. Dem tell me what I want to tell me is repeated again at the end of the poem. So the final stanza begins with the repetition of the way it opens. This could reflect how little has changed with the education system since he was a child. He is still being denied full access to his heritage by the choices of those with more power in society. And maybe he's even referencing young people now who are still being denied it. However, he does then say, "but now I checking out my own history." He's taking matters into his own hands, and the poem ends in quite a strong and defiant way. The verb carving in "I carving out me identity" is super important, because carving is a long and difficult process, but it ends with beautiful art. If you think about people sculpting things, it takes a long time. It's painstaking, but the result of it is beautiful. So this is kind of metaphorically representing Agard and his journey to discover his own identity. Every new fact that he acquires about an important Black figure or something that happened in the past for his heritage is a chipping away at this, carving out new facts. So, celebration and respect. So, we've got these quotes, and I'm going to go through them all. Most of these quotes, you'll notice, are actually from the italics parts, the bits that are talking about the important Black figures. So if we start with the pink ideas, so the Toussaint ideas. So Agard fills these with kind of praise for these Black historical figures. If we look at it, Toussaint with vision, the first Black Republican born, Beacon. These are all very complementary. Beacon in particular is a very interesting word. Beacons are bright lights. They can be warnings, they can be signals, or they can be used for celebrations. This metaphor then, calling her a beacon is a metaphor. This metaphor conveys how much respect he had for Toussaint, who shined brightly in her era. Onto the yellow ones. So this one is about Mary Seacole. So Agard is telling these stories. If you look at the way that he starts them all, he's telling them like their stories, and they are brief, but they're like in songs, like in the Caribbean tradition. So from Jamaica, she traveled far to the Crimean War. It builds it up. It makes it sound quite epic. He highlights the courage, determination, and resilience of Mary Seacole. She's still brave, even when the British said no. So he's always making sure that he celebrates the strong characteristics of these people. Now, a healing star among the wounded, a yellow sunrise to the dying. So this use of metaphors makes it sound almost beyond human. He's calling her a healing star, a yellow sunrise. Healing star emphasizes how brightly she stood out during the Crimean War. And yellow sunrise connotes, so makes us think of peace and hope against the horrors of war. This is what she brought to the wounded and the dying. So we've got a contrast here between the descriptions of her and the descriptions of the people that she was helping. It makes her sound incredible. Makes her sound like she is strong and vitally important, whereas he wasn't even taught about her at school. Onto the green ones. So Nanny de Maroon. More compliments, saying that she was visionary and unique because he's saying that she was a seafar woman. And we've also got the interesting choices of metaphors again for Nanny de Maroon. So the word struggle contrasts against the metaphors of hopeful stream and freedom river. The water imagery in these evokes natural freedom and peace. So if we imagine this water flowing freely, that's what he's saying that she was. Now that actually relates to what she achieved in real life, because I don't know if you saw earlier, but what she achieved was she broke free from slavery. So these metaphors all relate to the achievements of these famous people, these noteworthy figures from his history. And then lastly, as we've said before, the ending of the poem, but now I'm checking out my own history. The poem is a celebration. It is a criticism, yes, but he also wants us to take the celebratory side, the joyful side of it. It's a celebration of how Agard has learned about these important figures and the growth that he has felt since. His version of history is new and different to the one that he was originally taught. And that was checking out my history. Obviously, just like with the other poems, there's plenty more to talk about. That was a very quick run through. I must have missed quite a lot there. But if you wanted to add more to your notes or you think you didn't quite get it, there are all these resources to help you. There's the English Revision Drive, your teachers, and the useful websites that we've talked about before. I hope that you took a lot from that. Thanks for listening.